It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you all for joining. We know this is a national audience, but speaking on behalf of the board of NACD Utah, there's a special place in our heart for Utah and its innovators here. We're well known for transforming industries here, and so we welcome you to this conversation that we're having today on the board's role in AI-driven transformation. We have some amazing speakers today, and we are very excited to have a unique focus. I think sometimes when we think about AI and transformation, our minds always go to risk, and we want to keep this one more focused on some of the other areas that boards often have to engage in, specifically around, transformational major program shifts, where it's more of that consultative role, as well as the consent and the impacts on, fiduciary decisions such as budget, resourcing, and things like that. So we know those are really important. We'll be addressing those today. But first, I want to introduce our lineup of speakers today. We are very fortunate to be able to get this particular group. I will say they were handpicked because of their extensive experience, specifically in transforming industries. And so these folks are all innovators, have seen innovation firsthand or had a hand in it. And so first I want to introduce Teresa Briggs. She's a board member of software and consumer product companies, Snowflake, DocuSign, Warby Parker, ServiceNow, and she serves on the audit committee of several of these companies. She's a Stanford University Distinguished Careers Fellow, multi-decade career at Deloitte, holding national leadership roles at that organization and serving on its board. Next, we have Dr. Chris Gibson, CEO and co-founder and director at Recursion, a publicly listed clinical stage biotech company. He's developed new technology to accelerate clinical trials. He's an anchor to Utah's biotech community and beyond. So welcome, Chris. Glad to have you here. And Cydni Tetro is the CIO, Chief Information Officer at Swire Coca-Cola. She's a 3-time nationally recognized CEO, an expert at high-impact deals and innovation. She's worked at Disney Imagineering and serves on several corporate and nonprofit boards. So notably, she's chair, co-founder, president of Women Tech Council, which just held its AI conference with standing room only. I think Cydni's probably had a hand in almost every single technology evolution that there's been since over the last few decades. And then JaeLynn Williams, welcome, former CEO of Air Methods, where she transformed to healthcare and aviation after extensive leadership experience at 3M and GE Healthcare. So each of these people, as you can see, is operated in very different sectors. And so we wanted to specifically provide something that can either cross sectors or be sector specific. And so we're excited for these type of, insight-rich stories, the hard-won lessons that they can share with us, and specifically, how is the board role evolving when it comes to AI strategy? So we're not going to focus on, AI as a governance tool or, efficiency and automation, those things that we already know that it can do. But we want to get really specific around the transformation. So there will be time for questions. Glad to see that the chat's very active. You're welcome to pop questions in there. I know Ted and I will be monitoring that. And then towards the end, we will also have time for questions as well. So feel free to jot those down as you're hearing these experts talk about AI transformation in their industries. All right, so I also want to give them an opportunity to add anything else that I may have missed in their introductions, but this first, just to kick off the conversation, this is really open to all of them. We want to just hear a little bit of how AI is reshaping the core of your business or industry. As you heard, they're all in different sectors. So let's see. Cydni, why don't we kick off with you? And then we'll go to Chris and then JaeLynn. And then Teresa, I'd love for you to wrap up with your board perspective and being able to see these transformations, if that's okay. So let's go in that order and welcome.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the great introductions. And it's great to be with everyone this morning talking about this. Seems that's the hottest topic that we have. I think, Sarah, with your question around, the idea of what are we seeing as how it's reshaping industry, I put it in 2 specific categories. things that are happening to our teams and things that are happening to our industries and the collision of what those are. We've really never, it's an unprecedented time with the speed of innovation. People often talk that technology moves faster than every other industry. That's true. And what's happening now is it's moving even faster. And that adaptation is creating massive transformation. From an operational side, we're seeing AI applied to everything from how do you do more precise forecasting, and creating models that are helping you understand what it looks like to forecast 12 and 24 months out with more precision. Particularly in consumer spaces, the ability to understand locations and distribution. You're seeing things like that, all of the way to manufacturing lines. How do you prevent unplanned downtime in order to optimize those things? So you're seeing it from a very operational side. But I also think that the thing that we're faced with very first is in the internal transformations that are happening with the speed of work and the skills that our employees need to step into that. I've been in a number of conversations this week where the senior leadership team has now deployed AI operations teams to every function in a company to help them figure out how to just up level operations, which I really like this idea. I like this idea that we're going to go into businesses and be business led in helping them figure out the speed of work that's changing. Because some things like redoing a manufacturing line, it's a very big lift. It takes a lot of time and thoughtfulness to do that. But in the last 6 weeks, what I would tell you is the speed that we have seen in AI coming into the workforce and making like our engineering teams 10x faster. And the delivery, I mean, basically the entire product management world and the entire engineering worlds are getting turned upside down more rapidly than we have ever seen. So these transformations are forcing us to much more quickly adapt. And we're just at the beginning, which is, I think, the part that all of us have to think about is how do we infuse this just strategically into our decision making and our conversations to figure out the right pace for us at which stage and in which function. But if we don't do it fast, people are going to create competitive advantages around us.
Yeah, thanks, Cydni. Building on that, I think it's pretty evident. I'm in the biotech sector, highly regulated sector, as you all know. I think it's pretty evident that the tools are probably half a decade or close to half a decade ahead of the adoption right now, at least in the biotech space. And I think people are, as you mentioned, Cydni, really trying to keep up with this incredible pace of innovation. But also the larger companies, it's really difficult to rebuild a lot of the tools and deploy them where there's already a culture that's pretty already built. And I think there's a lot of fast moving companies who are building their culture on top of AI that are able to move a lot more quickly, but obviously don't have the resources of the larger companies. And so we're seeing this really interesting intersection. And I think in an industry like biotech that's highly regulated, up until now, we've seen sort of this really slow pace of adoption on the back end from a regulatory perspective. But just this week, in fact, in the last 48 hours, the FDA announced that they're going to be using AI to look at all of the applications that come in for new drugs. They've already run a pilot, and it's already been put in place. And so you now have almost this sandwiching effect where there's a group of folks in the middle who have not been adopting these tools at pace, and I think they're finding themselves pretty far behind. And the biggest issue that I'm seeing across this space is one of talent, because the number of folks who are really adept at using these tools is pretty low. The need for people to know how to use these tools is really high for the next sort of 2 to 3 years. But the agentic systems coming along are going to obviate a lot of the need, not all of it, but a lot of the need for people to know how to use these tools, probably over the 2 to 5 year period. And so we're going to have this really, really, really rough supply issue with people who know how to use the tools. And lots of people are going to get trained up on the tools. And by the time that supply is moderated, we're going to have agents that are doing a lot of the work, not all of it, but a lot of the work. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch the talent dynamic as well.
I'm an operator at heart. And so, maybe my perspectives are coming a little bit more from the operating side of this and where you might not think. So when you think of AI, you typically don't think of helicopters and flight crews. Air medical is a heavy asset business, high acuity business that depends on, basically calls from thousands of 911 calls, as well as hospitals across the country. And it's based on unpredictable and urgent need. And it seems random, but it isn't. And I think the team at Air Methods, just to give kind of an illustration, built a proprietary AI tool using the standard things, machine learning, LLMs, neural networks, to basically predict flight volume with striking accuracy. And I can't share the technical details of that, obviously, but the impact was pretty clear. We dramatically improved our ability to decide where to place new bases. And just as important, how much it would actually cost us to operate those profitably. So costs such as, staffing costs vary region to region, payment from healthcare payers varies from region to region, and all of those need to be into the mix of a profitable business. And so the win rate of our new bases went up significantly, and our capital allocation got a lot sharper. So I think the story matters in this conversation, because if AI can unlock patterns in something as chaotic as air medical, then there are opportunities in every business, even businesses you may not think of as being typical, tech or places or back office automation. So I think you have to ask the right questions, and you also have to have the right data. And I think it shifted a lot how we think about data in the company. So not all data is valuable. It has to be governed, it has to be labeled, and it has to be trusted, right? It has to be trusted by the people who are going to use it. So I think it really elevates data governance to a strategic lever within your organization, not just a component of, your IT team or what, your CIO is focused on, but really a strategic lever. And I also think, as you think about the rise of the public models, so even as like this meeting is being recorded, I think that you really have to focus on the fact that this is now a core component of your cybersecurity strategy, your IP strategy. And this is something that I think as board members, you really have to engage in understanding this and being ready to, articulate and test those that you help, lead and shepherd through this. So patterns, opportunities exist even in the most unlikely businesses, and we're seeing some great success in places like Air Methods that you wouldn't maybe think of as like the hot place for AI today.
Then maybe I can add the board perspective. So I'll focus on my software companies. So we're focused on two different paths. One is, how are we building AI capabilities into our product? Because a lot of your companies are going to end up buying our products, and you're going to bring AI into your environment through our products. And then how are we actually using AI in our own organization to drive efficiencies and some of the other things that you guys have mentioned. And I thought I would talk in particular about one of my companies I think is the farthest ahead on the internal use side, and they're really trying to use their own products to be kind of their zero customer reference case. They're actually redrawing their organizational chart. And let's say you have 10 FTEs today, you're going to have 9 FTEs tomorrow and 2 AI employees. And they're actually putting the AI employees on their org chart and badging them in essentially, and defining their role and building the agent capabilities that they're able to carve off for their agents and putting it in their org charts. And what we're starting to see is we're seeing some real op margin improvements from bringing our headcount. We're not shrinking our headcount, but we're not going to grow our headcount as fast as we had in the past. And instead, we're going to add agent employees. And we are already seeing op margin improvements. And so I think the interesting thing from a board perspective is, how do you monitor whether your companies are driving that internally, and how are you kind of holding them accountable for delivering the op margin improvements? And then from a resource allocation perspective, what are you going to do with that extra op margin? And so I think it's going to be a really interesting cycle of seeing these op margin improvements, and it gives us a great opportunity to reinvest in the product, to return to shareholders, to do M&A, and these gains I think are going to be real. And if you're not doing it, and your competitors are, you're going to become, going to be at an op margin disadvantage. So I'll just leave it at that. I agree with JaeLynn's points about risk, and I know we're not going to dive into risk in this conversation, although I will say at the board level, we are focused very heavily on cyber risk around AI. And we're adding a lot of putting a lot of additional attention on how are we going to make sure we're protecting ourselves from an AI cyber perspective.
So, Teresa, for those who may be newer to AI, clarification on the AI agent. Are you talking about a human or are you talking about an actual AI agent? Because I just want to be really clear of what you are talking about because, you know, you're in this world.
Yeah, no, these are not humans. This is technology. So it's taking, you actually program agents, right? So agents is a capability inside of a piece of software. You can program the task that the agent is going to perform that a human used to perform. And then you can, over time, those agents actually can become agentic where they're making decisions. So from agents to agentic agents is kind of the path we're on here. And then if you think about, you're going to buy a whole bunch of different pieces of software and they're going to all have agents built into them. You're going to have strategy around how you're going to orchestrate your agent activities across your organization. So this is where our software is really headed.
Okay, super fascinating. So many things just came up in even this introduction. Let's start with just, Teresa, you talked about, when you're building these products with AI, they're going into other organizations, right? And there's kind of this, catalytic effect or ripple effect, what have you. And I think, we wanted to talk about, the readiness of the value chain, right? And JaeLynn, I'd love for you to jump in here as well, because you've got some really great thoughts on, how ready is the value chain? And there's upstream, downstream. What is it that boards might be missing in thinking about that continuum? Go ahead, JaeLynn.
Great. So when I think about this and I think about the role of a board, as we govern, as you press on strategy and is it right, resources going in the right places, disruption often comes not from direct competitors, but from when you have an unexpected shift in your value chain itself. And so I wanted to just give you kind of a brief story to help illustrate how this is actually happening today. So years ago, I was the president of 3M Health Information Systems. It's now been sold off and is Solventum, the whole healthcare part of 3M. But while we were there, we created a platform before everyone called it AI. It was called 360 Encompass. And it automated about 30% of medical coding in the hospital space. So in the middle of the revenue cycle, it would take clinical information and turn it into the codes for billing. And it was heavily dependent upon physician documentation, what the physician wrote. And so we created a very robust consulting org to help physicians document better. And then we created software tools that would prompt them real time and help them do that. That today still has about 75% market share, high margin, really important business for Solventum. However, now think about what's just barely happened in the last year. Enter Microsoft. Microsoft purchased Nuance, not a direct competitor. Nuance does speech dictation for doctors in almost every hospital in this country. And they are already well integrated into all the electronic health record systems. So you've got your clinicians as a dominant user. And last year, they basically introduced bringing the ambient Dragon product into that space. So now, as a physician, I can speak directly to you as my patient, and it is listening, and it is creating all the documentation for me. And then they have also have it prompting the codes that used to happen later. They're now being prompted real time as care is taking place. So think about this. You don't have a doctor who doesn't have to spend time documenting, which they hate. They're not turning their back to you. They're engaging with their patients. So it's better for the doc, better for the patient. And it has totally disrupted the timing, and it's a more efficient use of that time to bring that up the revenue stream, up the value chain. So now you have something that Solventum currently has a very strong market share and makes, a really substantial amount of revenue from. And it has just been disrupted by someone offering, using AI tools, something that is much earlier in the value chain. And so I think the key lesson as I think about this from boards is we need to deeply understand the company's value chain. Because AI basically enables all this real-time data processing and decision-making at scale that was not available before. It can really reposition where and how value is created. So if we're not vigilant, we might find that our core products and services are rendered obsolete. by innovations that solve the problem earlier, or they solve it more efficiently. And to Teresa's point, data is core to all of this. And I feel like we all need kind of a school in what makes good data, because we think we have a big bucket of data and that data is useful. It is not useful. It has to be labeled. It has to be, meaningful. It has to actually have like completeness and accuracy. So there's a lot to learn about the data as you think about working with your CEOs and they say, oh, I have a bunch of data. Like there's some questions that probably need to be asked of that before you would invest heavily in some of these AI tools, because you got to make sure you have the data to deliver on the investment that you're making in AI. And that's a common thing that I see that I think isn't well understood, and it can end up with a lot of misturns. But this value change disruption, because it can be done simultaneous, this is like a big risk that I think, as strategy reviews happen and as you look at investment, really asking those questions to try to penetrate where's the risk in your value chain? Like, where's the value chain? What's the problem we're solving? And can someone solve it sooner, earlier, better? Because that could completely put some businesses, completely out of business by doing that. So a big risk.
So when we're talking about the pace of AI, I think it's interesting both at the tactical operation level, there's sort of a skills upskilling there. And then at the board level, there's a readiness level there. And Cydni, I'd love for you to weigh in on this, because it's interesting now you're in an organization that I would call probably more legacy, right? But, distribution, production. And it's in, as I've known you, you've been able to kind of go into areas that haven't been as deeply legacy. So I'm just curious, what for you, it sounds like you're upskilling all of the teams, but then what's happening at the board level to develop readiness? Or are they ready? Are they ready for transformation? Can you share a little bit about that?
I'm just, thinking about where Teresa and JaeLynn just led us on this, our board's ready. I would say a lot of conversations that are happening, our boards are fearful about where it's going, which is making them slower to figure out how to help teams. And I think we have to lean in really quickly here to drive that, because not all businesses, like where Teresa, like on some of those boards, like Snowflake, etc., they're moving so fast, right? Whether it's acquiring a Streamlit or doing all of these things that are making massive innovation changes in businesses that have not been what we've considered traditional technology. They are definitely being slower to adopt, and they're being more conservative. Plus, someone mentioned this in the comments too. We have concerns about data and where that data goes and who's using the data and the speed of which that it can use external tools. And so I think that the challenge we're faced with right now is that everyone has to realize, like, AI is not just a new technology that we're introducing like we have in some of the historical evolutions. AI is now one of the leadership capabilities an organization needs. And so what that means is we have to fundamentally think about how our leaders, who maybe, like, I've thought a lot about this kind of term that I've been calling kind of visionary execution, this idea that you need leaders who are not just, if you were just a good operator, AI is going to be as fast as you are on tasks. So you have to be able to combine that in your leadership stack with the capability of how can you see what JaeLynn was just talking about? How do you see around the corners about where the value is created in your business and where other people will be able, or where companies and AI will be able to step in and create differentiation that then commoditizes with the value that you created. And so from a strategic board perspective, like, our job is really where can AI replace that operations and be better? And then where do we have to lean in to create a strategic advantage to maintain that going forward? Because if you do it right, you'll get what Teresa said, which is the operating margin to reinvest in the thing that truly differentiates your company and goes above. I think there are big sectors we're seeing inside of companies. One is we've all heavily invested in our data and analytics team. It's super important we have good data on the back end, but the way that we're now going to be able to, we call it talk to data. We're very quickly on the edge of just being able to have people, when we have good data structures, say, do you know what? I need to compare Q4 to Q1. I need to see the insights in this, and you're going to write it just like you speak into a prompt, and it's going to deliver you the results. I don't need someone to go build massive dashboards for me anymore. I'm going to be able to talk to that data, gain insights, and create presentations. And we're already seeing that happen. Well, what does that do? That completely changes an investment we've made, and how do you evolve those talents into other places? So from a board perspective, I think we now have a responsibility to talk with high frequency about how AI is becoming an expected leadership capability to transform organizations and help us truly understand. And that conversation, I would say, in a lot of boardrooms that I've been in, has not yet happened. Like even this conversation was making me think like, I better make that the number one conversation in the boardrooms that I'm in, because it hasn't been. And I think what's happened this last quarter is one of your accelerants. The acceleration of the last 90 days in AI is creating more pressure than ever, and the speed of adoption. And then we have to remember, we've got an entire set of workforce that is now AI native. Like they're coming into the workforce as junior developers, getting up to speed with your senior developers in literally a matter of months versus years. That also has never before happened. So what does that mean for how we prepare our leadership teams to lead into it? Everyone's not ready yet, and we've got to elevate that conversation faster.
Yeah, my husband's a CTO at a tech company, and he was just saying 6 months ago he couldn't use AI to program. Now he can use it, and he's just blown away. You got these junior developers too. I said, well, the issue is how do you detect good code, right? That experience really matters, and being able to know, if it is good code, which he said it was really great code too. So therein lies a challenge around having junior developers too. Chris, I want to turn over to you because you've had this interesting opportunity in your career to come in and disrupt from the very beginning an industry. And are you seeing the similar dynamic that Cydni just mentioned, a little bit of, conservativeness from boards, or what's your take on this? Has it been easier for you to go in with this type of conversation with your board?
Absolutely. I mean, we built a company from the ground up based on what was called machine learning back in 2013 when we were founded. Now, AI, which I think people are misusing a lot, but it's become kind of the vernacular now. And I think it's way easier for us. So I'll give you a good example. Like we're a relatively small publicly traded biopharma company. We own and operate the fastest supercomputer in the entire biopharma industry. So faster than GSK or AstraZeneca or Pfizer. That was an easy discussion with our board because we saw a couple of things happening. The kinds of neural nets that we were training require really, really high memory concentration near the compute because we're using images and other really, really large data files, and the cloud compute was not set up that way. And we're seeing large pharma companies just now. We built our first supercomputer in 2019. We built our second one 2 years ago with NVIDIA, and we're seeing that the large pharma companies are just now starting to make those investments. And we suspect it'll take them a year or two to kind of even build the teams and the internal capacity and capability to even leverage those things well. And so we have a really nice advantage there. The disadvantage is those large companies have tens of billions of revenue, which is really helpful when you have to work in this capital intensive space. What I think is probably most sort of top of mind for me at the board level is around culture. And I think this is probably one of the things that maybe needs the most attention. We talked a bit about, for example, Cydni was just talking about developers and the last 90 days and the pace of change. If you thought the last 90 days was intense, wait till the next 90 days. And if you think that's intense, wait till the 90 days after that. And I suspect that's going to be true for the next 5 to 10 years. And so developers probably are not something we're going to need in 2 or 3 years, at least at any scale. And so you've got folks who are coming in now who are AI native, and they are accelerating teams really quickly if you could adopt them quickly. But as I mentioned before, and as Teresa and others shared, these agents are going to pretty quickly replace a lot of at least the scale that we need on things like developers. And the code today, you may need really experienced developers to tell you if it's good or not. Probably in 6 to 12 months, it will be definitively better than anything that most of your developers can do. And 6 to 12 months after that, it'll be absolutely better than almost anything anybody can do. And so I think how you start to shape your company in this kind of rapidly changing context really comes down to how you want to, you need the technology skills and all that, but your board has to be talking about culture. And I think Teresa mentioned this, how are you holding your teams accountable to making the pretty hard decisions? I'll give you a great example for us. We have built chemistry tools that beat our medicinal chemists at making decisions around chemistry. Guess who doesn't want to use the tools? The chemists. And so it's been a cultural, more than anything, more than technology, it's a cultural push. How do we get our chemists to actually use these tools and be excited about them? And or how do we avoid building up too much of chemistry capacity internally in the near term? And these are actually just harder things to do from a people and culture perspective than they are from a technology perspective at this point. I think this is one of the places where boards can push the most. How are you helping your teams make these hard decisions in the face of something that's moving so extraordinarily rapidly?
Yeah, and if I could just add to what Chris said, when we launched this this base kind of location AI tool at Air Methods, the biggest issue wasn't technical, it was human. It was our sales and field teams that had built this career of being, their intuition, their relationships in the field about where these locations should happen. But in reality, it was 50-50. It really was a coin toss, no better than a coin toss based on that. And so really the hidden cost of transformation for us wasn't as much in using, in building the AI system. It was actually in getting it used itself and having people trust that system, which I think it puts a whole new lens on change management and how aggressive that needs to be as part of our AI strategies as we think about this, and how questions from the board also need to be really focused in on, I want to see the change management strategy that goes with this AI implementation.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on something Chris said as well. Chris, your company is the disruptor against really big embedded competitors. And when you're on the bigger company side, you also have to be constantly sensing the market around what is happening out there where someone is going to disrupt you or a part of your business. And we had the very real experience on this recently at one of my companies. We started to see in one part of our product segment, we were losing to this small company. And they were ahead of us on their AI, the AI features of their product and the usability and the natural language interface for their customers. And our customers were picking them over us for this particular module. And so the company was sensing that data, and we talked about it at the board level, and we're like, well, why don't we just go buy them and bring that capability into our company? So we actually did that. And so, you can't get behind on these things. You have to know what's going on out in the market, make sure you have a very robust M&A team. And we even have a corporate venturing program in all of my tech companies where we're investing in a lot of these companies so that we have early rights to see what they're doing, first right of refusal on purchasing them, because you can sometimes buy it faster than you can build it.
Yeah, I would,
Yeah.
well, and truth, one of the things we've been seeing happen in that space too have been, like, Microsoft has taken a very aggressive strategy in that direction too. Basically, full, not just the open AI side, but full investment in almost every sector of the industry in companies in the AI space, so they can do the same thing you're talking about, vet them, figure out which ones are moving the market fast enough, and then get them rapidly in, which is creating just interesting dynamics at the speed both of which companies are inventing, but also the way that companies are reacting to that competitive.
Yeah, and it
threats.
also allows you to bring in talent, right? So you can
Yep.
you can sometimes buy $100 or $200 million company for a piece of technology that you find useful, but what you also really find useful is they have a lot of AI native talent, which today I agree with Chris. Eventually we might not need it, but I think in these bigger companies it's going to take us a while before we have no developers.
Right,
Sure.
as an operator, just kind of on that point, I know that sometimes we think, oh, Microsoft doing this collapse strategy, it potentially may sound negative, but as an operator where you have a life and death kind of business that you're operating, you really, with PHI, with FAA, we're like so highly regulated in two industries. It actually is a positive when we use, for example, Microsoft as our tech stack. And so the fact that they're vetting, bringing these AI tools into that tech stack, and then we can adopt that tech stack and feel more comfortable about the stability, the scalability, and, and basically the security of those tools. It isn't, I'll just say that as somebody who is, operating $1.3 billion company, that is, you can't test it to the AI startup. Like, you just can't make that decision. So there is some positive aspects, I think, to that roll up as we think about strategy we can take as boards, what do we support, and where do we feel more comfortable on that capital investment. But that was a big determinant for me of where we would go, because having that rolled into a Microsoft tech stack gives an inherent level of security to it that that I think can be valuable as you think through where those investments go.
Okay, this is a moderator's dream for the conversation just to naturally go. So I hate to interrupt folks, but Teresa, I want to come back to something that you said around, acquihires have been just, a very common, sort of M&A approach. What is different about an AI acquihire, in terms of valuation, or what have you been noticing that we
Well,
need to get ahead of?
yeah, I mean, AI talent is really expensive. And when you're a public company, you're competing against private companies that are very well funded. So for instance, if you're in the Bay Area and you're trying to hire from OpenAI, some AI programmers from OpenAI, they're paying them $2.5 million. And so that's not aligning with your pay scales, right? So they're very expensive. And so what we've done some of that for very key roles, but we have looked more for these acquihires, tech talent deals, where we can bring in a team of 50 or bring in a team of 75, and you pay $100 million or a couple $100 million for that. You do get some technology, but you get people. And so that's become very prevalent in all my companies, just as we try to scale as rapidly as possible. And talent right now is super important to get that done until the technology, as you mentioned, Chris, gets good enough and smart enough and capable enough that you can rely on it. But right now we need people. So that's been a really important strategy for us.
How with AI agents, how rapidly do you think that'll take effect, where the cost of a human, goes down significantly,
I mean,
or the
I think
FTE?
I think it depends on how quickly a company can get organized around it, because, JaeLynn made the point about data. You probably wouldn't be surprised that many companies are not ready for this because they don't have their data organized in a way that they can access it across their enterprise with agents that are driving workflow, getting things done. You have a lot of data in silos today. You've got all your application systems, and many of them house data, your ERP systems, your Salesforces, your Workdays. And then you've got all of your, kind of single point solutions that have data. And so the strategy of bringing that data into a format where you can query it and access it, and you've got unstructured data as well, PDF files, voice, social, like there's a lot of sources of data. And so if you're really far along in your data strategy, you're going to be much quicker in adopting your AI agent strategy. But if you're really far behind on your data strategy, you're not ready for it. And that's, I think, as a board members, those are questions that I think you really want to lean into and understand, where is our data? How far along are we on our data strategy? How is that impacting our ability to implement AI and agents and agentic AI? That would be a really important, conversation to have at the board level. So, my companies are farther ahead because they're building the products, right? They're using their own products. But the customers who are buying their products are in every stage of maturity you can imagine.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And related, there's
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Sid, just really quickly, related in chat, I think just outside of agentic AI, there's a question in chat around, do you think the cost of AI talent will eventually go down over the next several years? What are you seeing?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's going to go down dramatically. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's going to get to Teresa's point. The best AI folks in the world right now are a couple $1 million a year, or massive equity chunks, and really, really challenging sort of vesting. When you do these kind of acquihires, we've done 3 of those. Even as one of the upstarts, we've done several. Like the vesting around some of the key talent is really, really challenging to get right. So it's going through this really spiky moment where it's going to be super, super high, and then I think it's going to come down pretty fast after that, which creates a second wave of challenge.
Yeah. Sid?
I was just, Chris was making me think about kind of 2 challenges you have inside of a company. One is your readiness because of your data for certain applications. But then secondarily, I really think about the entire competitive advantage you're trying to build inside of a company and where you spend resources, because data can be super overwhelming inside of an organization that is unprepared for it, because there's so many silos of systems. So I think where boards really can lean in and can really play a strategic role is in the conversation around what parts of our business do we predict might be disrupted first? How do we address making sure that our ecosystem, i.e. our data and our infrastructure, our ability to build agents on top of that, are in places that we think create the most value for the organization first? Because it's a lot of work if you don't have great data. I will also say that we are seeing from an AI implementation side that what used to take a very long time to go integrate an API and pull data in, AI has also sped up significantly. So the ability to go in and to pull that data in, this used to be a very massive mapping system. You can now do it very quickly. And so the world of connecting one system to another, like we've done traditionally, has now also been disrupted, which will make it easier for us to identify which systems need to come where. You just have to be really methodical about it. I mean, organizations, especially large organizations, have people and culture and ecosystems and business models that deliver for them. So we're in this really challenging balance of how do you make sure you're not disrupted, you're creating the value in the right places first, and at the same time bringing the company along so that you don't disrupt what's driving revenue and profit for an organization today. And that's the tricky balance that leadership teams need help with. And that's the skill set that also leadership teams haven't had to deal with before. Like, I could be really amazingly great at my job and build a great organization and keep operating that. But today, it needs a whole new set of capabilities from leadership. And what we're seeing is lots of people picking up the phone and being like, I feel like I'm already behind in AI from a leader's perspective. How do I get faster? So I think we can also help our teams and those key leaders at the top know what it means to go create an AI strategy for their team, and they themselves get comfortable with it. Because you cannot fear this, you're going to have to embrace it.
Let's talk about board leadership specifically and the skills that, the expectation that board leaders will become AI experts may not be reasonable for most, but what would be the skills and experiences or mindsets that would be really, really valuable? And Teresa, I'd love for you to kick off, just given your extensive board experience. And then let's have each of you weigh in when you've worked with board members. What is it that you notice really helps them bring them into this AI transformative mindset?
Yeah, so I mean, I believe that you can't add board members every time you have a shift in something, right? Cyber, tech, AI, like you just can't pivot your board that fast. And so you have to have, multifaceted players on your board. And so to me, it's, board members who have dealt with disruption, who have been in jobs where they've had to pivot strategies. Those are the same skills in this phase of adopting AI, and it's disruption and strategy. And so it helps if you have people who are technologically savvy, for sure. So whether they're from a tech company, they're a technologist in a non-technology company, that is helpful. But I do think it's incumbent on every board member to up our games around AI, just so that you are conversant in it and you understand it at a level that allows you to think about strategy and disruption. And so one of my boards, we've embarked on a board education program that's pretty extensive. It started with management actually just really doing a deep dive into the AI strategy for the company to make sure we're all on the same page around where we are headed with AI, both in the product and in the internal use. And then there's an organization called Section. They have a lot of really good AI education for boards. We're starting to ask our board members to go through these modules and for learning purposes, and then we're going to have a dialogue about it at the board meetings. So we're investing in trying to bring our board members up to speed. Just like Cydni, you mentioned, you've got to invest in your executives to bring your executives along. You've kind of got to invest in your board, because you're not going to flip a 10-person board, tomorrow. So that's my perspective is, technology disruption, a strategy, and then really education.
Great. JaeLynn?
The thing that I would say is I think that there's experimentation is really important in both sectors. So one, as a board, as you think about your capital allocation, you look at those strategic plans, at those op plans, at those, LRPs, you have to basically make sure that you have capital allocated to what I would call experimentation. And I think experimentation is starting with something that is well-defined, concrete, can be small, can be large, but where you could see, you know, the output of that and you can see the improvements. So that's kind of one comment, is look for places with a defined scope and defined ROI where you can deploy experimentation within, you know, the companies that you're on the board of. The second thing that I would say is I really have been encouraging everyone that I interact with, and I would encourage boards, that now is the time for you to basically research and create your own individual and personal board AI tech stack. And what do I mean by that? Is that we have to be using artificial intelligence, right? So we need to be exploring these tools. So, you know, ChatGPT is one of those. There's tools that create presentations. There's tools that summarize information. So when you think about all the board decks you want to use, there's, you know, all kinds of different tools. And so what I recommend is kind of thinking through, what is it that I do? Just the tasks. Like, these are the things I do on a regular basis, and then find the tools that are kind of out there already that are defined to help you. And they may already be part of Microsoft. They may be something new, but engage in using those tools in your own work, your own preparation, and your own life. Because I think that that's the fastest way for us to really just start to see one of the exciting possibilities, to get articulate as you install, as you use these things, all of a sudden it kind of comes together. So I would say it's experimentation, one from a capital allocation strategy within the companies you lead, and making sure that they're thinking about that and it's well-defined, and a personal experimentation strategy that says, like, I'm going to dive in and start using some of these tools. And we had a great family dinner conversation when my adult children were absolutely stunned about all these tools that I'd used. I was talking about, and I think it just gave me like a whole new, you know, leveling up within my family. They're like, oh my gosh, mom isn't like ancient of days. So, you know, you can wow the family reunion this year too. So
Thanks, JaeLynn. Chris?
Yeah, I agree with Teresa in the sense that you can't add board members, you know, every time there's a new technology. I do think maybe this is different. I mean, this feels industrial revolution scale, and or perhaps even above that, sort of fire and electricity scale for humanity. And so this might be a time when I would, in addition to everything that's been said, maybe try to make sure you have some really native kind of AI thinkers or users on the board. I've seen, you know, a lot of large pharma companies, some of them have put some really, really thoughtful, creative folks on there. Some have also put sort of heads of IT who claim to be really capable on the AI side, and I think are probably leading those companies pretty deeply astray. And so getting that really native kind of, you know, somebody who's actually built neural networks and who has a great kind of strategic background, I think that kind of experience is actually something a lot of boards could use one or two of these days. And it seems like that adoption is actually happening pretty slowly outside of the core AI companies. We're seeing it, of course, at companies like OpenAI or ours. But if you go look at the rest of the world, you're actually seeing very few of these incredible people being asked to join boards, and probably a lot of them would be really interested in that. And so I think there's probably a nice opportunity for progressive companies outside of the core kind of AI building space to be first to bring some of those folks onto the boards.
Thanks. Cydni? I mean, no, I actually love this conversation, and I love that, Chris and Teresa, that you kind of gave different perspectives on that. I think one thing is true is that, because I would lean where Chris said, which is the level of transformation we're faced with today is unprecedented. It is like a once in a significant generation. We've had a lot of technology innovation happen and transformation in the last 20 years. This point in time is different. And I would also echo what Chris said, which is more traditional companies that are not tech companies, because I have that unique perspective of like growing up, living, being a technologist, living in that world. I know the speed of it. It's like in my DNA. I love that. And then I happen to sit on a healthcare board and be in food and beverages, and the speed of those businesses are different. And they're much slower, and their ability to move faster, it's like woven into a different element of that. And so I think as boards, like not only, I totally agree, everyone in here should be using it. You should all go pay for like a pro account on one of those platforms. It should be in your DNA every day. Like you should use it. And you should probably have like Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT up on your window, and you should try them every day, like baseline those things. But in traditional businesses where the pace of business, they always didn't like tech companies moving fast enough. That's where our greatest risk exists, because the decision making and the cultures and the speed of business, because of all sorts of reasons, is slower. And so we're going to have to infuse new discussions, ideas, creativity into board level conversations so we can infuse it faster through the rest of it. Because like what was already mentioned, you're going to see disruption from small companies in huge value chains because they can and will. And that creates just so much risk. And the risk the boards are always trying to manage is shareholder value and performance of the organization to align with that, and its ability to really continue on its trajectory. And you're trying to do that in really smart ways. And I would, to be fair, I'd probably be in the same camp of Chris, which is all of us should learn more, and we should not be afraid of adding new voices into the room that have never been there before, so that we can take on the frontier that we are currently facing.
Thank you. We do want to do some Q&A, so you can pop your questions into chat or you can raise your hand. And while you're thinking about your questions you want to ask these fascinating panelists, Teresa, I'd love to get your take. And, Chris, if you had some thoughts, or anyone of the panelists, bringing in those new perspectives. You have a couple of choices. You could expand your board. But when you think about where would you ideally put, this, these perspectives with this AI expertise, more native, transformational expertise, where's the ideal in your mind to position these folks on your board?
What do you mean? You mean put them on the board?
Like, is it a transformation committee? Is it, Sid brought a really interesting point up that it's actually should be part of risk now, but what's in your mind the best way to utilize folks with this particular expertise?
I mean, I guess there's a couple of options. Some of my companies, we have a technology and cyber committee, which is broader than cyber. It includes technology and technology transformation. And I think they could play a very strong role there as a board committee member. You could also have an advisory board. If you are trying to just get really smart about what's kind of going on in the world around you, you could do it that way versus onboarding a board member. I think these people are in a little bit of short supply right now because not that many companies have really achieved this vision of, really becoming kind of AI first. So you'd have to look very carefully out in the market to find the right people to put on your board that also have the experience that's broad enough to add as a complete board member. But I don't disagree with Sid and Chris. Like, if you can find that person and you have a board opening, you should bring them on.
Yeah. One thing that I as I think about this, I would say that AI is no longer just an innovation topic. And I think as we think about this from a board perspective, I would say that AI is a fiduciary topic for us that has changed. When you think about a board and the duty of care, for example, to guide and make informed decisions, that any prudent director would do, if you don't understand how AI is impacting your company operations, your competitive modes, your workforce, then you're not really fulfilling the duty of care. So maybe this harkens a little bit to where Teresa was saying, it isn't just an expert where you assign them AI. This is infusing across all aspects of a company, and it's infusing across all board members. I think it is a fiduciary responsibility in the same way that if you think about, the duty of loyalty of a board member, it's implementing the right strategies, not the trendiest ones, not the loudest ones, but the right ones that are the appropriate ones for your business. And then while we're not talking about it today, the duty of obedience, right? We know there's all these other aspects, with bias and, privacy risks and all of that come with AI. And I think as board members, we need to be engaging in those dimensions as well to be fulfilling the role of a board member. So I think as we think about this, is it about innovation? It is, but it's not just an innovation topic for boards. It is a fiduciary topic for boards. And I think that approach will help us actually tackle it more comprehensively as we think about it.
Thanks, JaeLynn. Go ahead, Chris.
Just real quick, I agree with Teresa and JaeLynn. I think, one thing to play around with, especially now with some of the larger context length or token limit models out there, is AI board members. And, you can get some really interesting perspectives about how you might be thinking about the future of AI using AI today. And you might be surprised how they might compare favorably to other board members in terms of their capability to understand pretty complex scenarios. The good news about those is they're like relatively unlimited, and you can tune them and re-ask them, and they don't get tired of taking your calls as well. So I would encourage folks to, see if you can't add a couple of AI board members to your team.
Yeah,
There was a question in chat. Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
sis.
sorry, Sarah. Well, actually, kind of going into those questions in the chat that are coming up. Also, you are the inevitable thing the board has to do right now. So I haven't seen any examples where boards have mandated, like, here's this AI cultural shift. Because also I think that's partially because the speed of this is happening really, really rapidly. Technology companies, and I would also say a lot of your leadership teams are talking about AI in their strategies already. I think the elevation that has to happen at the board level is that the board too believes that this is a critical component of the fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value. And that is a conversation that I have seen less in the boardroom for companies in non-tech spaces, and that's, I think, the evolution that has to change, where conversation from the board now needs to be like, are we asking questions about where are we going to get disrupted? How are we weaving this into leadership capabilities? How are we creating avenues to upskill our own employees? How are we changing the ecosystem and the framework for how we view the company so we're ready for the future? Those conversations in the boardroom have been fewer. I mean, I bet if we took a poll around like everyone who's not on a tech company board, how often you're talking AI, it's probably not ranking in the top tier of things you're discussing. That's the change boards can make right now, because if you talk about it, it infuses into the company's leadership team, because they know they're getting that question next time. They know they're diving deep. They know that that is something that you're expecting from them. And then it allows you to help create a strategy map from them. I don't think we're ready yet for mandate, but if it's not what the board asks and what the board is talking about and helping them identify, then it won't become important to the leadership teams on a daily basis, and it will become just bottoms up. And we need them to meet together because of the criticality nature of how we're going to deliver value from our companies today.
Thanks, Sid. This is the board culture really is, I think, critical part of this and making that part of your board culture. I do want to note that it is at the top of the hour. Ted is going to put a survey in chat. We would love for you to take the survey. And I do know the speakers may need to also hop off. They're very busy individuals, but there have been a lot of questions. So I'm just curious if the speakers would be willing to hang on for 5 more minutes and answer a couple more. And if you have to go, that is perfectly fine. But I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to respond to the survey and ask a few more questions. There's a bunch that just came in at the last minute. So are you open to that? Give me thumbs up if you are.
Say another 5.
Yeah, 5.
Okay, let's do another 5 minutes.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
I've got a hard stop,
Hey,
so
Chris,
I've got to
thank
run.
you.
But thank you so much.
We appreciate you.
Chris.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. We talked about board mandates.
Sarah,
And yes,
I want to comment on the board mandates, and this may not
Yeah.
go in the mandate category, but I've now seen this 3 times where, as you think about investment in the company, whether it's investing in new headcount or investing in new technologies, where there has been kind of a rule set that you have to first answer the question of, could I use an AI productivity tool to help this headcount replacement, right? So before I get an approval of that headcount replacement, is there a way to use an agent, as Teresa was saying earlier? And it's very basic, but I do think it's a good place to start when we talk about mandates of just, even as people bring forward capital investments, IT investments, really as board members asking, have you vetted that it can't be done more efficiently or for less cost by incorporating some of these pieces? Simple thing to do, but I've seen it now 3 times, and I think it's a very interesting way to shift the thinking about what's out there and can that be done?
Yes, that's great. And it's very tactical too. Appreciate that, JaeLynn. There was a question on social impact and just AI and, its impact on the environment. I'm curious if any of you have dealt with that or had a board that's dealt with some of the social impacts of advancing technology.
Well, on the ethical AI front, definitely, that's part of the, when you're a software company, you better be thinking about that, right? So we have the company has an AI governance framework. They have a cross-functional group of executives that are the AI governance committee. They deal with everything you can imagine, from the ethical use of AI all the way to what tools are we going to allow our people to use? Are they going to be able to turn on Gemini or not? It runs the gamut. But the ethical use of AI and how we're using it in our product, in coding our software, and how we know the code is good, to your point earlier, Sarah, like that's all part of the company's governance. And then we add the board governance on top of that.
Thank you. There was an interesting question here. Having an AI-focused board member or expertise member, is that also going to be obsolete with the pace of change? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's what Teresa said earlier, which is when you're trying to find board members, you're trying to also find really strategic individuals who have seen lots of challenges and different strategy movements. And I mean, you're looking for really creative, great problem solvers around the table. I think when we're talking about AI skill set, and Chris might differ on this because he was going very deep into people who understand neural networks. But I think when I think about it, I'm thinking about people where technology and the innovations happening in that are kind of in their DNA. So when they think about strategic problem solving and the types of challenges that businesses face as they grow or they do acquisition strategies, et cetera, they've got not just that foundation, but they have an appreciation for what this transformation in technology will do. And they can bring insightful questions into, because they understand a little bit deeper on what technology means, the architectures of those, the speed of change. Because I don't think anything changes the fact that while AI is going to do a lot of things, what humans are really good at is going to become even more important in this next wave. And I think what AI allows you to do is then say, okay, we need to really emphasize on not like, are you the most amazing operator in just X function, but can you help us strategically guide the outcomes of a company over 5 or 10 years? I mean, that's what you want from your best board members. You just need them to have more deep capabilities in this space.
We've been joking about, is there going to be a future where they're just a bunch of computers around the boardroom? Is it fully AI board, right? AI agent board? So probably not anytime soon.
That's funny.
I know there's a European company with a CEO. It's an AI agent, kind of. Anyway, JaeLynn.
No, I was just going to say, I think this is a really fascinating conversation, and I love the AI CEO and the AI board. But what this to me, I tend to simplify things down, but when you think about AI, it is a tool. We think Industrial Revolution, it's a tool. And as leaders, the core question still goes back to value creation for our customers. And I really think we're looking at tools to help us create value. We're looking at tools that disrupt where the value comes from. And we're looking for identifying problems to be solved and the questions we ask. So those are very human traits, or traits that we all have as board members. And it really comes back to, are we asking the right questions about the value we're creating and innovating that way? And I think we don't want to lose sight of, that's really the foundation of how we apply AI today. So AI is an amazing tool set. The compute power is amazing, but we're still, going to win or succeed in the marketplace based on asking the right questions, solving the right problems, and kind of creating value for those that we serve. And if we weave those through all of that, which to me I kind of feel like maybe it's an AI advisory board is probably member rather than maybe a permanent board member, kind of going back to this, do they become obsolete, right? Maybe they do. Maybe you want it in a specific area, but really being able to use that as a true subject matter expert, maybe for a particular strategy or a period of time. But I guess I have a lot of faith in all of us. And I just think it's about the problems we solve, and it's about the value we create. And those tools are here to help us be more efficient to do that. And we want to make sure that's where our focus is. That's the value that we're going to build, and bring to the markets.
Sarah, right. I think we need to call time.
Yes, that was the perfect closing
As I
thought,
watch the head
JaeLynn.
count
Thank
dwindle.
you. Well, I'm just so impressed. So many people wanted to stay on to hear your thoughts. Thank you, everyone. This is a fascinating conversation. I was patenting neural networks 20 years ago, and so now it's like, boom, it's here, and it's super exciting. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.